Projected President-elect Biden is going to be heading to the White House. What kind of relationships will his administration have with lawmakers becomes one of the major questions on the forefront of our minds. While the U.S. Senate majority is still in flux, there is a very good possibility that it could remain controlled by Republicans. And joining us now to talk more about the dynamics on Capitol Hill is Washington Post political reporter and anchor of Power Up, Jackie Alemany. Jacqueline, thank you for joining us. So you heard the conversation that I was having with Antoine and with Leslie about the future of this Biden administration, particularly when we're talking about the dynamics of Congress. I'm wondering if you can weigh in on the idea that that a Biden administration, if it's working with a Mitch McConnell-controlled Senate, is partisanship still on the table?
Well, first, we still have to see what happens in Georgia. You know, the Senate majority all boils down to Georgia, and whether or not Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock can pull off a win and help flip the majority. If it comes down to, you know, Kamala Harris, the new vice president-elect, having to cast a tiebreaker. That being said, I think, quite frankly, it's just Pollyannish for us to believe that Joe Biden is going to be able to forge some sort of magical bipartisan relationship that's going to suddenly, you know, get all of these policies pushed through the Senate that have sat there for years, quite frankly. But I mean, there are some things that I think we can count on happening fairly quickly, like an additional stimulus relief package. I think that's certain to get pushed through, you know, and that actually might not even need a President Biden in the White House. That might happen before he transitions in January. But look, the president-elect Joe Biden is going to face a series of challenges. He's sandwiched between the leftist flank of his party, you know, led by progressives like AOC, and people like Mitch McConnell, who at the end of the day are looking out for their party majority. And I think we need to be real here. And despite this president, this current president, President Trump, losing this election and having to vacate the White House, and this being a very clear referendum on the president, Trumpism is still well and alive. And while I think a lot of never Trump Republicans think that there's going to be a lot of soul searching and potentially a facelift of the Republican Party, Trump and pro-Trump voices are not going anywhere. If you look at, you know, what Joe Biden is facing, this is going to be President Trump still tweeting incessantly, applying pressure onto Republicans via his Twitter feed, via his son, via Ivanka Trump, all of these people, these pro-Trump people and his own blood who have their own political aspirations and, you know, potentially threatening fundraising opportunities. You saw Don Jr. this week just explicitly tweet that anyone who wants support, essentially, in 2024, you know, needs to come to rally to the defense of his father. So I don't think that as much as Joe Biden campaigned on bipartisanship, being able to forge relationships, that might be true. But our country is still really polarized, and that is reflective in, I think, a lot of the results that we're seeing right now.
Jackie, I want to stay with you on this thread for a second, because I'm curious about your thoughts on who might be the head of the Republican Party come January. Is it President Trump, or former President Trump then, who's no longer in office? Is it Mitch McConnell, if he does in fact retain the title of Senate Majority Leader? Does it become Ronna McDaniel as the RNC chair, or somebody else entirely? Where will Republicans be getting their guidance?
That's a really good question, and it's what we're all going to have eyes on. You know, I spent the last month doing a lot of reporting, calling around and trying to sort of pan out in the scenario that the president lost this election, where things would go. It sort of initially led me to this big deep dive we did on Trump staffers being able to find jobs in a post-Trump presidency. And my findings there were that, you know, they were going to have a tough time if they had put their name on any statements, that inflammatory statements in relation to immigration, or some of the more racist statements that the president has put out, quite frankly. And from there, it sort of segued into, you know, what questions are Republicans going to be asking themselves and each other when it comes to hiring and making all of these big transitions and shifts from the White House to the party out of power, and now potentially out of power in the Senate as well, TBD. But I do think, again, that it's naive to think that, that this party is going to once again conduct an extensive autopsy that's going to, I think, cure all of the ails that people might not be that comfortable with. At the end of the day, this president did receive an extraordinary amount of votes in the popular vote. And again, the hallmark of the Trump presidency is just how much all other Republicans have coalesced to every single thing that this president has done. And we haven't even seen now the voices being that loud and coming out. You have the Mitt Romneys of the world who put out milquetoast statements, written statements every once in a while. But, Mitt Romney has tried to run for the head of the Republican Party time and time again. And, the people have not wanted that quite, as we've seen from the election results. So I think, for now, I think it's a safe assumption that Trump is still going to be a large presence. It remains to be seen who might, come out from behind him. If there are the Nikki Haley's, the Mike Pompeos of the world, people with political aspirations, but you're already seeing them cozy up to President Trump, put out tweets here and there in support of the president's allegations of voter fraud that are unsubstantiated and are undermining American democracy. So I think we'll continue to see some of that.
I want to dig in deeper with you, Jackie, on the two Senate races in Georgia. While the die has been cast and CBS News is now projecting that Joe Biden will be the next president of the United States, there is still a question mark when it comes to control of the U.S. Senate, and we won't know that outcome until January. Talk to our voters a little bit about what's going on in Georgia. How about a refresher course as more attention is potentially turned towards the Senate? Why is there going to be this runoff? Why are two seats up for consideration in Georgia, and why does the entire control of the Senate, that entire chamber, rest on Georgia now?
Yeah, so I was actually in Georgia in the lead up to Election Day. It was a fascinating week on the ground, and the excitement from Democrats was palpable. From the bottom of the ticket, from some House and state candidates, hyper-local candidates that I shadowed organizers with, to the top of the ticket, to former Vice President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I did spend some time with door knockers and canvassers who are working for Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, who is challenging Kelly Loeffler, and Jon Ossoff obviously is running against Senator David Perdue. And Loeffler and Perdue had taken a nosedive in the final weeks, months of the campaign. They were dragged down by President Trump. And quite frankly, what Republican strategists told me is that they expected this to happen. It's sort of a confluence of things taking place in Georgia. It's, this is the result of changing demographics that has been happening for years now. The Black population in the state is growing at a very fast clip, along with the Asian American population. There's also been a lot of migration from Northerners who have come down and really changed the political composition of the state. There's also the fact that Stacey Abrams, ran in 2018. She lost in an election against Brian Kemp that a lot of people still feel like was stolen from her, and created 3 different organizations directed towards voter turnout, registration, and helping underserved communities. Every single voter I spoke with, Republicans and Democrats, credited Abrams with the groundswell that they were seeing. But the person who really kicked this off was Jon Ossoff. And that's where I think it's impossible to miss the poetic justice that we're seeing at the moment the resistance started with Jon Ossoff, and now it might very well end with Jon Ossoff. When he ran in the special election runoff in 2016, he really created a lot of energy and attention. He was sort of the Beto O'Rourke pre-Beto. The amount of money and excitement that he brought into the state, I think, really revitalized this feeling that Democrats could potentially take it back for the first time since 1992, which was when Bill Clinton won it. I already, every single campaign staffer, Democratic ones that I've spoken with over the past 2 days, they're already moving down to Georgia. The voter registration deadline is December 7th. So people are going to be pounding the pavement to turn people out. And that election day is January 5th. And David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler have not done themselves many favors by some of the more inflammatory statements that they've put out recently. Kelly Loeffler, the current sitting senator, has tried to distance herself from the president, played dumb on certain things like whether or not she had ever seen President Trump's Access Hollywood tape. And then David Perdue famously, notoriously made that comment mocking Senator Harris's name, the pronunciation of it, which did not sit well with voters as well. So, Democrats have a fighting chance in this state, despite the ruby red status of it historically.
Yeah, it's certainly less ruby red as we're looking at our current vote data. And you make a very good point, not only about Ossoff, but about Stacey Abrams and how much their races, their campaigns have galvanized voters in Georgia. Tell us one more time, Jackie, what was the voter registration deadline for Georgia voters who are looking to vote in this Senate runoff races?
It's December 7th.
December 7th. I'm wondering how the population of Georgia might grow in the coming month as Democrats and Republicans flood to the state.
Right now.
I don't know if Airbnb counts as a permanent address in terms of voting, but I imagine that Georgia real estate agents. Right. I was just saying, I think Georgia real estate agents might be in for a boom right now. If Republicans do, in fact, control the Senate and Mitch McConnell remains then the leader of the Senate there, you have studied McConnell, you have reported on him, you've seen him in action. As much as we know that he and Biden have had a cordial relationship when they have served in the past, McConnell is at his heart a political strategist in many ways. Do you anticipate him being persuaded by Biden's calls for coming together as a country, or might he be working hard to stymie the success of a Biden presidency to try and help elevate the status of Republicans?
Look, I might come off as cynical, but I just have a really hard time seeing the Senate Majority Leader suddenly embrace some of these bills that, again, have been sitting on the Senate floor for years now. I think maybe from a superficial level and from this idea of civility, that there's going to be more bipartisan relationships, meetings, trips to the White House and Capitol Hill, definitely a less contentious relationship than we've seen between someone like House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and President Trump, which they've publicly traded, very heated exchanges and words with each other, from Twitter to television sprays. I think that is going to be a thing of the past. It's just not the former vice president's style. But I don't think suddenly you're going to see, the Senate Majority Leader take up a lot of these, and rally his caucus, even in the minority, around a lot of these bills that have been lingering. I don't think Republicans are suddenly going to want to pass comprehensive gun legislation. They're not suddenly going to rally behind the Green New Deal or, a lot of the tenets of the Democratic platform, quite frankly. But I do think that for, the sake and mental health of America, it's definitely going to be a more stable situation in Washington, D.C. But I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to mean that there's going to be, what the former vice president has really campaigned on, which is a lot of this bipartisan action, maybe on something like infrastructure. But at the end of the day, Mitch McConnell cares about winning back the majority and protecting the status of his members. And, I just don't think that necessarily equates to getting behind Democratic legislation.
Yeah. Well, Jackie, I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive then into the Democratic side. There are tensions, of course, among House Democrats. Earlier this week, an argument broke out where liberals were blamed by other party members for costing the Democrats not only the control potentially in the Senate, but also so many House seats. They were arguing that the president's rhetoric, that the rhetoric of other Republicans about the socialist wing of the Democratic Party was really hurting Democrats' chances in all of these down ballot states, and potentially their ability to pass legislation. What's going on now in the Democratic Party?
It's really remarkable to see play out so soon after the election. I mean, this fight happened before the election was even called. These tensions have been obviously bubbling for a while, but I think that Democrats did a pretty good job at suppressing a lot of this for the sake of the Democratic Party, in hopes of taking back the majority, winning the presidency, and the changing of power in D.C. But at that conference call that you noted, which was the Democratic caucus, people like Abigail Spanberger, who nearly lost her race and just a few years ago was able to flip her district in Virginia, just let loose, from expletives to calling out people who supported defund the police, and really targeting those progressive voices who have shifted the party to the left. But look, you're not going to see progressives, just take this line down. They still feel like they're the reason why there's energy, youth, excitement in this party. And you saw AOC fighting back right away on Twitter, also calling to account really the Biden campaign as well, and a lot of the, I think, strategies that more moderate Democrats implemented. She called out the Biden campaign and some other Democrats around the country for suspending their on-the-ground voter contact operations, and said that, maybe some of the House Democrats who lost can look at the way that they ran their digital operation. Perhaps they weren't even able to execute it the way progressives have, who are far more online and really know how to use social media. So she hit them right back after that call, and called out a lot of the problems that she sees in the party. But I don't think that these tensions are really going anywhere. But I do think there is certainly a conversation to be had. We'll see whether House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is able to maintain her leadership position. And at the end of the day, I think that, there are a lot of questions to be asked about the really, just how much Democratic voters can handle in terms of moving to the left, whether calling for things like defunding the police, the Green New Deal, some of these more progressive policies that have really taken the limelight, whether or not Democratic voters truly support that, or if actually the party still sits pretty much in the center.
Very quickly, before I let you go, Jacqueline, you mentioned the possibility of Pelosi maybe not being the majority leader there in the House. Do you foresee anybody in the Democratic Party actually mounting a challenge?
Yeah, I was running through that in my head as I was saying it. So last time around, there were a few people who tried to run for it, and including, I believe, it was Congressman Tim Ryan. I'm blanking on the other names right now, but those efforts fell far short. And actually, those people faced a lot of backlash in the party for trying to, I think, exploit the chasm that they were seeing between progressives and the more establishment wing of the party. I think that we could expect some of these younger, gadfly Democrats, like the members of the squad, potentially try to front a challenge, but that remains to be seen. And I'm not quite sure that is a fight and a battle that Democrats want to have, while there is so much work to be done in transitioning from the Trump administration, which has essentially hollowed out a lot of the different, arms of the federal government, to a Democratic White House and potentially Congress.
Yeah. All right. Jackie Alemany, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.